Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We are back with another edition of the Frye Art Museum virtual visit. Today, I'm super excited about our guest, Meghan Elizabeth Trainor, who is a Seattle-based artist specializing in new media. Meghan is also a hedge witch, and we're looking forward today to delving deeper into all that entails. Meghan, thank you so much for being here. Super excited to talk to you. If you could just start off by sharing with our audience who you are and telling us about your practice.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I grew up in Seattle. I proudly attended Seattle public schools my whole life. And, I found myself, I think like most people who live or move here or grew up here, you hit those dark months and you need an outlet, you need something creative. And so I just grew up in a world where everyone was either a musician or an actor or an artist. That was just kind of what you expressed yourself in that way. And as a self-taught artist, I just kind of lean into that idea that you need to make a lot of bad art to make good work. So I just didn't worry too much about what I was doing. And just there was an amazing arts community sort of in my late teens, early 20s here in Seattle. There was Art Walk. There was, it's something that I had a lot of exposure to. And I ended up working at Cornish. A lot of people think I went there, but I just worked in the office. I worked with the database for the dean. And that kind of ironically was the spark for a lot of my interest in new media. The way that queries and digital patterns emerged in working with databases and trying to extract information was something I was like, I wonder if you can make art with databases. Now at this point, people had been, I just wasn't quite aware of that. And so I found myself through a series of fortunate events in New York talking to somebody who was networking water. And it's like, excuse me, what are you doing? And that was sort of my exposure to sort of really fascinating ideas in new media art, in particular networked objects and physical computing. But as I was drawn into new media art, I was also very adamant that I didn't want to make screen-based work, which can be confusing for people who associate digital art with animation or web based work, which is a lot of it. But I was very interested in the material aspect of computing, the haptic, the way that things were built or engineered or how they smelled even.
Mhm.
And so my work since then has been an exploration of the inputs and outputs outside of traditional interfaces
Mhm.
that we're exposed to in sort of daily life, which is the little screen, the
Right.
keyboard, maybe some touch. How can we expand that out into more magical places
Mhm.
in artwork? And then in recent years, my sense of place and communing with nature and haptics and all of those things really made an easy path to start exploring the rituals of hedge witchery, which is primarily working with meditation and plants.
Mhm.
And thinking about the sacredness of electricity. We think of electricity and digital technologies as something very recent,
Mhm.
but I like to interrupt people by sort of pointing out that electricity predates water. It predates the planet. It's an ancient substance. And if
Wow.
we recalibrate our relationship to it, I think it changes how we interact with the
Mhm.
digital world.
Mhm. Wow, that's excellent. That's really excellent. I'm already curious and wanting to know more. So the obvious, can we even call it an elephant, mammoth, several
Go for
mammoths
it.
in the global room is obviously this pandemic. And so, um, in light of what your experience as an artist, a practicing artist, has been to date, and then taking that subset of when we all started you know being quarantined or locked down or however you choose to describe it,
Mhm.
what changes have you observed in your own practice since the onset of quarantine due to COVID-19?
I think the first thing is I planted a garden. I mean, that those first, yeah. I see a lot of other people I know sort of getting into artistic expression, people I don't know to be artists, like drawing, engaged in all kinds of interesting projects. And I was like, I've got some dirt and I'm going to plant food, and I'm going to plant other things and sort of have this this experience of I've never really had access to land in the same way before this year, so it worked out really well. But that creative process to me became very grounding. I sort of would start the day, and everything's pushed into digital. And even though I'm a person who's very comfortable with technology and the digital experience, and have been thinking through this sort of interactive digital space for a long time, I think it almost pushed me to an extreme of I want to get my hands in the dirt. I want to see things grow. I want to, sit, in meditation with the mystery of creation, because everything is almost beyond our ability to kind of digest or comprehend right now. And it wasn't just the pandemic. I mean, I'm just a few blocks from CHOP, and I think a lot of us in the arts community just are involved in those issues already. And to see everything really become very intense and extreme this year, that need for grounding, I think, was something we all sort of had to adapt to very quickly.
In case there's anyone watching this who's not familiar with CHOP, could you just give a brief breakdown of the acronym, but also sort of what it is, what it was?
Sure. So CHOP is the Capitol Hill Occupied Protest. It started as, I think, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. And it was this space that was formed kind of ironically. So like most of the world, there was just a huge amount of protests that erupted in support of Black Lives Matter earlier in the year. And this is things that have been going on in our community and around the country and around the world for a long time. And so marchers were in front of the East Precinct, the police station, very close to here. And the police didn't let them pass. And so it was called the Western Barricade. And there was this standoff between police and protesters. And after a number of days, the police vacated the station. They just left. And we still don't know why. We don't know who gave the order. The mayor and the police chief both say it wasn't in their hands. And there was this fear that it was going to be destroyed or burned down. None of that happened. Wow. But the police simply retreated from the neighborhood. And so there was a self-policing. There was an autonomous zone that sprang up. And there was an interesting arc of activism. I myself went down when a garden started. Marcus Green of Black Star Farmers started just sort of DIY gardening down in the park. So I went down there with because I had just planted this huge garden, so I had leftover seeds. So there was all kinds of activism happening down there. There's mutual aid, and it became, it's a huge topic to delve into. But it was, again, most people in the world heard about it, and that lasted for quite some time. Then eventually the police came back, and we still don't know what happened there. But so there was just a lot of it. I mean, it's been a roller coaster of a year as far as the isolation and then sense of community, kind of coming and going in these really intense ways.
Right. Yeah, no, I right there with you in terms of the level of intensity and just the level of uncertainty in particular. Speaking of which, you and I and some other friends of ours have sort of been constantly talking about or implicitly alluding to, so when this is all over and sort of by midsummer, I think we were all, if it's going to be all over anytime soon. So keeping all of that in mind and keeping in mind, the fact that we just made it through this election, we still have to make it through inauguration, as well as the increasing restrictions that we're seeing due to COVID throughout the country. And then the real effects that, those things will have, that they're already having within the art world. How are you thinking about the changes that are happening, the changes that are sure to be coming, and how they will affect artists, but specifically arts organizations. Whether we continue in this reality for the next however many months, or whether it does seem as if, there is a quote unquote light at the end of the tunnel at some point in 2021.
Well, that's a lot to address. I think with organizations, and I have groups that I work with. I have clients I work with in the arts, and so I think everyone has done an amazing job, again, of scrambling to get into this digital space and make that function.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people in the art do have this ability to be creative in problem solving, or creating community, or creating events.
Mm-hmm.
That's what artists do. We take on these new tools and say, how do we make art in this particular environment? How do we make art with these particular tools?
Mm-hmm.
How do they impact, who our audience is, or what we're saying?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I feel like where I've seen the most exciting things happen is really in individuals, and the way that people, there's kind of been this trend in Seattle lately. Trend's kind of underselling it, but you're seeing people converting living spaces
Mm-hmm.
into art spaces. So
Right.
I think
Right.
about Wanawari in the Central
Mm-hmm.
District, or the Grocery in Beacon Hill, Frontier Home, the Nano Forest. You have people who take the smallest little bit of space that they have, and sort of create a space for experiencing art, or sharing, or performing, because institutions are maybe something we feel like we can't rely on,
Right.
or we can't get to because they're closed.
Okay.
So that's been a really interesting thing to watch. I'm opening up a space in my house that used to be a gallery. It used to be Aura Gallery, and now it's Moss Art Space. And in theory, I shouldn't be having arts events in my house, but no one comes anyway. So usually what you have is a room, and people know that there's artwork in it. So it's more of an online experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something I might have done if it weren't for the pandemic, but there's this sense of, we kind of have to put on a show no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a space, come on down, put your artwork in it, and we'll talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And is there a difference between 8 people coming to a show and no people coming to a show?
Right.
So there's that kind of, and again, it goes back to, growing up here, where people just, oh, we're going to have a band play in the basement, just that resourcefulness that comes from, I've created something and I want to share it. How do I do that with what I have in front of me?
Right. Right. No, that's true. And I think in that might have been a thing for sort of cities who experience sort of their coming into the art world sort of 20, 25, 30 years ago, if not 40 years ago already. But, with Seattle, one thing I have to say that I do appreciate is that ongoing, almost kind of grassroots, definitely with that DIY enthusiasm. Like, this is something that I did, I want to share it with everyone. And that is something that you still see here that perhaps you don't see as many other places that are now sort of obvious art world capitals in the United States. So that much I definitely appreciate about our art community here in Seattle. Last but not least, what do you have coming up, and how can people follow your work?
Well, to follow me, you can just go to meghantrainor.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Megtra, Megtra, or Instagram, Megatron, Megghatron. I'm pretty easy to find online. Well, no, I take that back. There are some problems with my name, but I'm loud online is all I mean. So what I'm going to be doing this winter, because I felt that pull so strongly to kind of, literally get my hands dirty, to work with the earth, to really meditate on natural systems, and trying to really marry what we think of as the sciences and technology and then sort of the wonder of the natural world. I think sometimes we look at those things as being apart from each other, and so I'm always trying to pull them back together. So I'm looking at I'm really obsessed with logic gates, which are electronic components, but they're also like a mathematical term, and they're part of spoken language. So I'm creating crystallized logic gates. So I'm creating these electronic circuits that are also have crystals built on them, which is, you know, sort of a very witchy aesthetic. And then building electrodes with charred wood and resins from trees. So really trying to do this almost medieval sense of electronic building, you know, getting at that really ancient idea of electricity, and decoupling it from a, you know, it comes from a factory and it's so miniature we don't really understand what's happening, but really revealing, you know, we can extract electricity out of wet earth and salt water and, you know, these disparate metals that we just stick into whatever vegetable we want. And that recalibration, I think, is really just where I want to be this winter, is just kind of working with things in a really wholesome, like wholesome electronics. It's, I think, where I'm going to be until we get through this phase of what we're living through.
Right, for sure. Well, Meghan, thank you so much. This has really been a great conversation. Thank you to everyone who follows Frye Art Museum, and we look forward to bringing you another virtual visit very soon. Thanks again, everyone. Thank you, Meghan.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.